I'm not taking up space, but creating space and using my platform so other people can have the resources to tell their story.
Hi, Herrana.
Hello.
I am so excited that you're here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. I'm very excited to talk with you today. I was just very inspired and in awe of you and everything that you do while I was doing research for this interview. So I'm very excited to hear more about your story and learn more about you and kind of what inspires you. So for anyone who doesn't know you, can you tell us just a little bit about the work that you do and how you got started in your career as a human rights specialist?
I always get this question. It's always tricky for me to really
pinpoint.
But I grew up in Ethiopia. So my aunt used to work for UNDP. And I used to go on different walks, especially for FGM, and doing a lot of advocacy work with her as a young girl, where she would take me on trips or give me any like t-shirts that they would have when they were really working against like the AIDS epidemic at that time. So I was exposed to the idea of working within that social impact space. And then I think Ethiopia has like a big impact on it too. You just see so many disparities within the continent. So it was always in my face to a certain extent. And then on the other end, I've always wanted to be some sort of an artist. Yes. So I used to actually want to be a singer. And I auditioned for Disney Channel when I first moved to.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I wanted to be on Camp Rock.
Didn't we all?
Yeah, but they gave it to Demi Lovato, so I lost that one.
That's funny.
But you know, I always wanted to live in those two different worlds. And then professionally as well, I went to school at Rutgers University, and I got my undergrad in political science and gender studies, and that's where I really started focusing more on like the academic part of advocacy work, and then finished my master's in international law and gender equity, where I did a focus on women, peace, and security. So really looking at the impacts of conflict on women. And I did a fellowship with the NGO working group on women, peace, and security, and focus on the Central African Republic, Somalia, and Western Sahara. So seeing how Security Council resolutions were being implemented within those regions. And around that time is really when, you know, I started focusing a little bit more on my creative work as well, especially with the pandemic. I really wanted to capture Black happiness, especially during a time where there was so much turmoil. I felt like my job was also very demanding from me, and I've always kind of been around this Black struggle and experiences within my work, which I'm grateful for, but also as a Black person, it does get to me sometimes.
Very draining.
Yes, so my therapist actually suggested that I pick up photography. You remember we used to do the little walks? And that's when I really started getting into photography and production. I didn't even know the titles of like what I was doing. I just remembered that I enjoyed it. Yeah. So that's kind of like my path and where the two worlds started merging together a little bit.
So I know that a big thing for you is knowing that you're not defined by what you've been through, right? But I feel like so much of what you do is so deeply intertwined with your personal life experiences, right? So I really would love to know more about the story of your upbringing and just your immigration experience kind of, and how this has translated into your work as well.
Yeah. That's actually a really good question. It's always like a battle where I don't want to be defined by my experiences or my different identities in a way that is harmful. And in other ways, it is also what makes me who I am. So coming to the US, I think one of the things that I've always noticed was I didn't know my place. Especially being an immigrant, I often felt like my culture was not understood. And I was this foreign person, especially growing up in such a secluded town that did not have much diversity. And growing up in Atlantic City around there, like Galloway, there wasn't many Africans like immigrants. Right. So I instantly felt like an outsider. And then in the other sense, also just having to navigate what it means to be a Black woman, especially during that era. I do feel like now with TikTok and social media, and even just after the push after 2020, that you see so many like visibility within our community and acceptance and just this digital community that you can have no matter where you live. But like 2007, 2008, all we had was YouTube. And everybody had like bone straight hair, you know. So it was just a lot of not understanding who I was and who I wanted to be and navigating that space, where now within my work, my identity, even those experiences are so big for me.
I think it's so beautiful when somebody's work is so deeply connected with their personal experiences, right? And some of the most meaningful and impactful projects are led by people who have this sort of relationship with their work the way that you do. So how did your immigration specifically and your general experiences as well serve as a catalyst for your career in human rights?
I think it was really just navigating within that space as like a person, as I mentioned in kind of like the last like conversation we have, is really just understanding what Blackness meant and the different barriers faced. So even with my parents, it was more of understanding the discrimination and xenophobia that they were experiencing while, you know, we were filing our taxes, and even having to go through those experiences with them. We're just seeing some backlash because of their accent. Or even some folks saying to me like, oh, you don't sound like you're from Africa. And I'm like, what is that supposed to mean? Like a lot of these little microaggressions at such a young age, but I didn't really understand it fully. And it wasn't until I really got older, and especially going through my academic background, where I really started learning about these deep-rooted issues. And that's where I was like, okay, this is where I want to work in, where I want to bridge the gap where there are barriers so more people like me could be in rooms. I think that's one of the things that I'm really passionate and keen on, is more of not just creating space for myself, but more of creating space for our community and expanding on it. So I know I always go back and forth with this theory where a lot of people are like, oh, it's a success if you're like the only Black person in the room. But for me, that's just more of the stepping stone of starting to opening up that conversation.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of like where my passion and my background really kind of connected, especially when I was younger and coming into my career now, and even just working on my first film in Ethiopia. It was really just going back to invest in Ethiopia and my community, and not being attached to just being an artist in New York or in the US.
And speaking of your work in New York, I noticed that a lot of the work that you do is focused on uplifting local marginalized communities. And I think there's always this like tug of war present when you come from another country of, do I focus more on the community that I'm a part of right now, or my community back home? So how do you confront this, and where do you kind of focus your energy? Because although I'm sure you wish that you could help everyone, you still are one person at the end of the day.
I think it's really important, especially spaces where you're not native to it, to really be conscious of your place. And I think that's one of the things, no matter what project I work on, I really make sure that I'm not taking up space, but creating space and using my platform so other people can have the resources to tell their story. So a good example of this was Our Block, which is a project about gentrification. And I did it on my neighbors. And mind you, I'm not from New York and I'm living here. So with that project, I had a bit of a struggle, like, is it my place to tell this story where I'm not a native in New York? However, they were my neighbors, and every time I used to go to my deli, I would stop by and talk to them and go. And I was like, you know what, maybe I can tell this story, but it would be more of sharing my platform in a sense of I'm completely behind the scenes. It doesn't have to be anything that has to do with me. It's not a narrative that's about Herrana did this project. It's more of the platform creating this for the community that's already in place. And I think that's one of the projects where I battled with it the most, where I'm like, should I do this? Should I not? And then I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do this.
Yeah.
And even working with the family, they just had such a great time. And we did it in a very authentic way where they were already planning to have a barbecue that day. So we're like, okay, we'll just come in and shoot. And they already knew me from the street. So it worked really well. And they were actually very grateful that somebody came in and took the time to interview them and hear their story. And their grandmother was also in the images as well. She was speaking about how she got married off of gates. There was like a church and so many things of just Bushwick, like Bed-Stuy, that you don't really hear about, and how Black folks have been in the space for years. So I think it's knowing not to take up space and knowing your boundaries with folks.
Absolutely. And I also think it can become a little bit like mentally conflicting too when you're African, when you're an African person assimilating into Black culture of like not wanting to compare struggles or put one struggle before the other. So I love that you found a way to kind of make it like this selfless act, but it's also very organic at the same time because it is your home as well at the end of the day. So yeah, we've discussed your career in human rights in terms of like the organizations you work with, you engaging with your community, but I think my favorite aspect of your career is how you've been able to incorporate this human rights expertise into your artistry with the creative production agency that you started, Trucha Studios. So what was the inspiration behind this and what do you hope to accomplish with it?
So I started Trucha Studios, I would say I thought of Trucha Studios in 2020. And that's when I was doing my walks and doing the photography. And I met Mikhail, who runs a community center in Bed-Stuy, and their whole space is really about life and really feeding into the community. They used to do food drives every Wednesday, and it was a vegan food drive to help with the food deserts around the area as well, and making sure he was providing like healthy foods for the community as well. And it just felt like such a happy space. And at the time I was like, I want to like document this. And then I met with a friend, and he like is a DP, and he's like, okay, I'll help you. We were just shooting it, and I didn't even know I was directing or producing, and it became this 1.5-year project where we were just like shooting all the time, interviewing different folks, and it kept getting bigger and bigger. And at the time I was like, I love doing this type of work where I can have my background in social impact, but I also can use my creative lens and going into shot lists and everything. And at that time I was also starting to model. And really understanding how a lot of brands are utilizing Black folks for marketing value, not so much of actually investing in visibility, especially during a time where there was so much push to have Black visibility. I felt like it was also an opportunity for them to expand their markets and their reach as well. And I saw that just modeling, because I'm like, I know I got hired for this gig.
For sure.
And I bet you could probably relate to that. So I was like, and I just kept toying with the idea, and it wasn't until 2020 where I really landed, 2022, where I really landed with, okay, it's going to be this creative agency that touches on social impact and does visual storytelling. And I think the biggest hurdle with that was a lot of folks didn't grasp it. Like, what do you mean? Because we have this idea where we disassociate, like, okay, if you're doing community work, social, like you're in one department, and it's kind of segregated. And that's why I've always found DII initiatives so interesting, where it should be more integrated within different supply chains instead of it being its own.
Like more so a part of the like company's culture.
In every aspect. Instead of, okay, that's that team's problem overall. And that's kind of where I think I struggled with when I first started it. And I feel very grateful that I had a group of friends and colleagues that really believed in me for my first project, which is called Welcome Home, that told the stories of Black immigrants. And even with that, we casted with a nonprofit to tell their stories. And it was my first time doing like a really creative project that was also centered around fashion. We pulled a lot from daily paper. And to do that project, I had to invest so much of my own money. I was so nervous. I was like, if this doesn't go well, like, I don't know, like what's going to happen. But I had, like I said, like a community of friends also that were like, we're going to do this, where They were doing art direction for me, production, and even my producer, Sarah. We just met like a month before, and she was like investing into the project because she's like, I believe in this, and I feel very grateful for that. And once I released that project, people were like, wait, this actually looks really dope. And it actually told a story, like this is feasible. And slowly that started catching on with folks where they were like, okay, it is still possible. But transparently speaking, there are certain rooms where it's still not fully understood. And I feel, and I feel very boxed. Like you're either doing this or you're this. You're either a director or a producer, or you work in the social impact space, but there's no way the two can merge. So it's still a battle of having to prove my theory of change.
Absolutely. So you did an interview with Forbes magazine, and I feel like they said something about your work that I think is so true. And it's that you artfully display inequalities that open up conversations for solutions. Emphasis on the word artfully. So you're aiming to reduce disparities by connecting the art of visual storytelling to actual systemic change. And I think that's so cool because it's like you're helping your community in a way that feeds your soul as well, you know? So it's very rewarding to be able to be artistic and expressive while also advancing social justice. So you have your creative agency, you're working with all of these different organizations, you're also a model. How do you see all of these different aspects of your career connecting? And does it ever get stressful, like balancing it all?
Of course. Of course. I mean, even coming to this interview, I was running from another meeting, and it does get stressful. And sometimes I do feel overwhelmed or I'm in over my head, and the imposter syndrome starts kicking in, especially when I feel like my work lives in so many different mediums. My imposter syndrome is like tripled. Because sometimes, like even modeling, I might not feel the best. And sometimes even in my professional career, I might not feel like I have enough experience to talk about certain things. And then as a creative as well, there's often times where I'm on set and I'm questioning even my own vision. I'm like, is this going to be fire? Like, am I not going to like this later? Like, did I make the best decision? So even in those different aspects, sometimes my imposter syndrome feeds into one another. And then on the flip side, it also supports me where I feel more confident. For example, working on my first film in Ethiopia really touches on the experience of young girls in the global South. And doing that project, I felt more empowered because I've worked in the space for so long, where I have worked on a lot of issues that have to do with forced marriage, on education access before. That when I was doing the project, as much as I was at times doubting myself as a director, I was like, Herrana, you know what you're talking about. Like, you've worked in this space, like you literally have like your degree in this, like you got this. So it's a double-edged sword where it feeds into one another. And I think it's a balance. I'm trying to be better with also delegating tasks now and knowing I can't do it all. And the importance of also, as a small business owner, knowing that you need funding and investors and applying to grants and actually having that monetary backing within your work that can help you expand and invest on your like colleagues to help you overall with your goals, because you can't do it alone. I think whether you're like modeling for Black-owned brands or you're spreading awareness for social issues, you always do it in a very artistic way. And I think that's also just very smart strategically, right? Because like humans, we're just attracted to beauty. I think it's in our nature. So if something is like beautiful enough, I think it'll be compelling and it gets people to open their eyes and pay attention, right? So speaking of this artistry, I really do want to hear more about this project that you're working on, The River. I know it's supposed to be an exploration of Black beauty standards in Africa. So what was the process behind developing this project, and what's your goal with it? So, funny story. With that project, I actually applied for the Shea Moisture Grant powered by Tina Knowles in May. And at that time, I was unemployed and like not in the best mental space. And I remember I was at my aunt's house and it was Easter and I saw the grant. I was like, okay, let me apply. And I didn't even think I would get the grant. But at that point, I was like, I need to just try something.
Yeah.
So I put in the application, completely forgot about it. And then around August, I got an email that they were doing like a background check about the grant. And I thought it was a spam, and I was like, So I wasn't even gonna respond, and then afterwards, I realized it was real, and it just felt like such a surreal moment at that time to even get a grant by Tina Knowles. I was like, what? Yeah. And that's afterwards, crazy. Yes, I was just kind of like, I was gay. Yeah. I was like
Miss Tina. Oh my gosh.
And just, it also gave me the confidence at a time where I was really questioning myself.
And needing it, yeah.
Yes, like mentally. I think New York has a way of making you feel like you're always 10 steps behind. And social media has a way of always rubbing it into your face, like, that everybody's doing amazing and is making so much money, and whenever you're in a place of conflict, it can make you feel horrible about yourself. So I always feel like I'm very spiritual. I feel like God brought that into my life because outside of just the monetary value for that film and just the investment, it also gave me the ability to go back home. And I haven't been home in over 8 years at that time. And so much of my work and who I am is about my childhood being in Ethiopia. So when I got the grant, and we had a mentoring session with Tina Knowles, which was really amazing, with 4 other women as well. And also my mentor, Dion, who I got from the program, I told her 2 project ideas. It was expanding Welcome Home in the US or this film in Ethiopia. And she was just like, if you don't go to Ethiopia, like, we're taking this money back because you need to go. Gosh, yes. And then it was very quick. I booked my flight within like 2 weeks, and I had to start getting to writing. Yeah. And a lot of the visual part and the story, I always feel like I wrote it my whole life. So it didn't take me long to bring the idea to life because it was so many concepts of my childhood that I've lived almost every day. Yeah. So it was just a big part of just putting what was in my head into writing. And the first month, I would say like November, I was having such a hard time writing, like giving the production company I worked with in Ethiopia, which is called Kene, the treatment, because I couldn't start writing. I had this huge like kind of
block.
Yes, I had all the ideas in my head, but writing it, I was so scared of what it could be. Yeah. That it blocked me. So as I started meeting with production companies, I had to write something, and that was the hardest part, was just starting and believing in myself to write something and to show people. Yeah. But once I started doing the ideas, writing, getting the treatment on board, getting films, which I would not be able to do this project without them, with Frey and Teddy. They're both based in Ethiopia. They saw the film. They're like, we have to do this. Like, you need to come here. And yeah, it's a 16-minute film, and it really touches on the experience of young girls, as I mentioned, in Ethiopia, and just different women, that touches on the lens of education and religion, also forced marriage and body tattooing that we have in Ethiopia called Nikasat, and then just also water access, which is why I called it the river. So in the global south, outside of just even in Ethiopia, like, a lot of these rivers and water sources make women vulnerable to gender-based violence, because folks will know that you're going to go fetch water. There's always this kind of place of vulnerability that it's created. And I remember growing up in Addis, like, I was never allowed to go in any places that had water by myself, because it was just dangerous. So my grandma always used to be like, the river takes people. She used to say that, and I never understood what it meant. And that's why I really titled the film The River, since the film has just such a complicated relationship within culture and beauty, that I wanted it to also represent the different experiences women have when it comes to climate justice and access overall. Yes. And even shooting the film, there were so many instances within the production where they thought I was kidnapping them, because our call time was so early and there was a van, and one of my actresses like jumped out of the van. She was like, I don't know what's going on. Oh my gosh. Yeah, it's reality, you know, and every time those instances happen, it reminded me that this project is so much bigger than myself, and that I couldn't even have imposter syndrome. Yeah. So it was such a beautiful experience, and I'm just so excited also to showcase what's possible on the continent. I did not bring anybody from the US to shoot this. Wow. It was all shot in Ethiopia. Like, post-production is also being run by an Ethiopian company. Wow. So I wanted to showcase, like, Africans can do beautiful art, and we don't me to always do work in the US as well, and showcasing that. So I'm really excited for it.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. I'm so excited for it too now. I'm like, that is really, really exciting. And overall, I'm just excited to see what you accomplish in years to come. I think you're doing such important work, right? I feel like we need people like you, especially right now. There's just so many horrific things going on in the world and so much turmoil, both politically and socially, that our generation is kind of waking up to. So we need people like you who are like literally devoting their entire lives to enacting change and spreading awareness. So keep doing what you're doing, and thank you for sharing your story with me.
Of course, thank you for having me.
Of course. Yay! We did. That was really good.
Thank you.
Really good.
I was like, oh.